In our town, there were doors you knocked on, and doors you survived by avoiding. The Crow Ranch belonged to the second kind. It sat beyond the cottonwoods where the road thinned and the air seemed to hold its breath, a place where even the wind passed through quietly, as if it knew better than to linger. Folks said the man who lived there had hands built for breaking things, and a past no sermon could wash clean. Silas Crow. His name was spoken the way you spoke of storms or sickness. Low, careful, never too close to bedtime. I remember the evening I first saw her walking toward that house. The sky was bruised purple, the kind of dust that makes a person feel smaller than they already are. She came barefoot down the dirt road, dress hanging loose on a body worn thin by hunger and too many goodbyes. She paused at the fence like someone deciding whether pain was preferable to pride. Then she lifted her chin and kept going. Eliza May Turner had learned early how to disappear. Towns taught her that, doors closing just before she reached them, eyes sliding away when her shadow fell across a porch. She slept where she could, behind stores, under wagons, once in the hollow of a burned-out barn where the ash still smelled like old grief. She worked when she was offered work, took coins when they were pressed into her palm, and never asked twice. Hunger had become a companion, she understood. It woke her in the night. It hollowed her voice. It made her careful. The women in town watched her with narrowed eyes, as if need were contagious. Martha Bell was the loudest among them. She had a way of talking that cut without raising her voice, and she liked to say that girls like Eliza brought trouble wherever they landed. Eliza learned to keep her gaze down, her hands busy. She learned that dignity could survive even when comfort could not. That day, she had been turned away 3 times. Once from the bakery, where the smell alone nearly dropped her to her knees. Once from the livery, where a boy younger than her told her to move along. And once from a house with lace curtains and a woman who pretended not to hear the knock. By the time the sun began to sink, Eliza's steps had slowed to something like surrender. Fear is a strange thing. It grows loud when you're safe and quiet when you're desperate. By the time she reached the edge of the Crow land, fear had become a distant noise, like thunder far off across the plains. Hunger was closer. Hunger was honest. The house looked darker up close, as if it absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. The porch boards were worn smooth by years of heavy boots. No flowers, no sign of welcome. Eliza stood there long enough for doubt to bloom again, then lifted her hand and knocked. Nothing. She knocked a second time, softer. The silence pressed back, thick and unmoving. When the door finally opened, it did so without ceremony, just with scraping against wood. And then him. Silas Crow filled the doorway the way a mountain fills the horizon. Broad shoulders, graying beard, eyes set deep beneath a brow that had learned not to expect kindness. He didn't look surprised to see her. He didn't look pleased either. He simply looked. "I can work," Eliza said before he could speak, though he gave no sign that he intended to. Her voice held steady, even as her stomach twisted. Cleaning, cooking, anything. Silas's gaze dropped to her hands, scarred, steady, honest. He noticed the way she stood straight despite the tremor in her legs. He noticed what men like him always noticed first, that she wasn't asking for mercy. "You alone?" he asked. "Yes." Another pause, long enough to feel like judgment. Then he stepped aside. Not an invitation, just space. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old wood. A single lamp burned low. He set a plate on the table without comment. Cold beans, bread gone stiff at the edges. Eliza thanked him, though the words stuck in her throat. She ate slowly, carefully, like someone afraid the moment might vanish if she rushed it. After a few bites, she hesitated. "If you don't mind," she said, nodding toward the stove, "I could warm it, make it better." Silas watched her the way he watched everything, like a man measuring risk. Finally, he nodded once. The kitchen was plain, but it was a kitchen all the same. Eliza moved through it with a familiarity that surprised even her. She warmed the skillet, added a scrap of fat, stirred the beans with patience instead of haste. The sound of food hitting heat filled the room, soft and steady. The smell changed, deepened, became something that reached back in time. Silas sat at the table, hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing at all. When she placed the plate in front of him, steam rising like a promise, he flinched, just slightly. He ate in silence, slowly, with the care of someone rediscovering something he thought lost. He didn't thank her. He didn't meet her eyes. But when he finished, he pushed the plate aside and stood, pulling a blanket from a peg by the wall. He sat on the floor near the hearth. "You can sleep there," he said. Eliza nodded, too tired to answer. As she lay down, wrapped in borrowed warmth, she listened to the house settle around her, to the sound of Silas moving through the dark, to the quiet that felt less like emptiness and more like rest. Outside, the night crept in slow and gentle, and inside that feared house, two people slept, each holding onto a fragile, unspoken hope that maybe, just maybe, something had begun to change. Morning came softly to the Crow Ranch, as if the sun itself was unsure it was welcome there. Eliza woke before Silas, the blanket still warm around her shoulders, the smell of last night's fire clinging to her hair. For a moment, she lay still, listening. The house no longer felt like it might swallow her whole. It breathed, slow, careful. She rose quietly and began to clean, not because she was asked to, but because work had always been her way of saying thank you. She swept the floor, set water to heat, mended a loose hinge on the cupboard with hands that knew how to make do. When Silas appeared in the doorway, she startled, then offered a small, uncertain smile. He nodded once, nothing more, but he left a chipped mug on the table, filled with coffee darker than the night before. It was his way of saying he had noticed. Days settled into each other like stones in a riverbed. Eliza cooked, Silas fixed. They spoke only when needed, yet the silence between them softened. He began leaving extra wood by the hearth before night fell. She learned where he liked his tools laid, which meals he finished and which he quietly pushed aside. Sometimes when she thought him gone, she hummed, low and tuneless, but full of something like remembering. Silas never commented. He only paused in the doorway long enough to listen. In town, her absence did not go unnoticed. Martha Bell noticed everything that could be turned into a story. She said the Crow Ranch had claimed another soul, that no decent girl went there without losing herself. Whispers followed the road like dust. Even Sheriff Jonah Hale rode out one afternoon, his horse uneasy beneath him. He spoke to Silas on the porch, voice measured, eyes watchful. Silas answered in few words. Eliza stayed inside, hands trembling, the old shame rising in her chest like a familiar ache. When she finally returned to town for supplies, the stairs cut sharper than the winter wind. A woman she once helped turned her back. A man muttered something about girls like that. Eliza carried her basket with her head high, but the words followed her all the way home. That night, she packed her things, so few they fit easily into a sack. She left it by the door and sat at the table, staring at the place where Silas sat. He noticed the sack before he noticed her eyes. He said nothing. Instead, he set a plate between them. The beans she favored, warmed just right, bread softened with care. The gesture landed heavier than any plea. Eliza's breath caught. She sat. She ate. Tears slid down her face and into her hands, and Silas pretended not to see, which was its own kind of mercy. The next day, the town came calling. Not with guns, not with threats, just with judgment dressed as concern. Men stood at the edge of the yard, hats in hand, voices tight. They spoke of safety, of reputation, of what kind of man Silas was known to be. Eliza stepped forward before fear could stop her. She stood beside him, close enough to feel the steadiness of his presence. "She's here by choice," Sheriff Hale said, his voice cutting clean through the murmurs. Silas did not raise his voice. He did not reach for anything but the doorframe. He stood, and in that stillness, the crowd found nothing to push against. One by one, they left, unsettled by a man who refused to become what they expected. Seasons turned. The ranch changed. Smoke rose more often from the chimney. Laughter, soft, surprised, found its way into the rooms. Eliza no longer hurried her meals. Silas no longer ate alone. The fear that once clung to that land loosened its grip, replaced by something quieter and stronger. If there is a lesson in this, it is a simple one. Those simple things are often the hardest to live by. Sometimes dignity is restored not by grand gestures, but by a seat at the table. Sometimes the kindness that saves us is offered without words. And sometimes the meal that changes everything isn't about hunger at all. It's about being seen and choosing to stay.